It is now time to begin our question and answer period. Your turn to ask your questions and have your say. Before we begin answering and taking questions from across the country, let's fill up the stage with those who will answer. So, Rémi Racine, Humer Lacroix, I welcome you back to the stage. I'd also like to invite Heather Conway, Executive Vice President of English Services, Louis Lalonde, Vice-Président Principal Service Français, John Bertrand, Senior Managing Director, Manitoba and Saskatchewan, and Pierre Guérin, Directeur des Services Français, Région de l'Ouest, also to join us on stage. How did I do?
Very good. Très bien, Marcy.
Thank you. My husband.
You did very well.
Everyone available to answer your questions about CBC Radio-Canada, and a reminder that people on the web all across the country are submitting questions today via Twitter and through email.
Carla, Marcy, just a second.
Yes.
I have to thank you for an amazing job putting together these stories. How can you not be inspired? This is what the public broadcaster tries to do, trying to influence, trying to share ideas, trying to engage in communities. One of our very important piece in the 2020 strategy is using the engagement in communities as our fifth platform, and we thank you very, very much. It was spectacular.
Alors, rapidement, avant de poser...
So quickly before going to questions here, just to remind you, for people here in the room, there's a microphone that is there. Yes, there it is. There's a microphone there. So if you want to put questions, short questions, one question per person, and the people up in the galleries can come downstairs up to the mic. So for the people on the web, in French, APA at Radio-Canada, in English, APM at CBC. And in French, you can Twitter RCC Community, and in hashtag in English, CBC.
Convocation Hall once again on Anglais, so if you want to make your way down to the microphone at the back of the room. One question, we're going to try to get as many questions in as we can, so if you are at the microphone, if you care to share your name, that would be great, but it's not something that we require you to do. And also a reminder for those here in the room today, because of course we are all here together, the panelists will take some of the questions on site after the event as well, so there will be a little bit of time for that. And now let's begin. Our first question, I believe, comes on online.
Oui, alors c'est une question qui vient de Twitter.
So this is a question from Twitter. It's for Hubert Lacroix. Comes from Joël Lafont. And Joël is asking, Radio-Canada is going through important decreases in funding. What models of funding can be used and how do we do it? I'll try to answer the question in both languages. I'll start with the language the question was put in. In an environment like ours, absolutely have to have conversations on the financial model. I mean, for months now, we've been saying that in such a disparate environment, based on a model where publicity income was giving us a sort of a balance between parliamentary budgets that were decreasing, and I mean there are governments over the years that had different models. So if publicity revenue disappears from that equation, we have to replace that income in some way. There's all kinds of models in France, in Spain, a part of or a percentage of the income from the internet service providers is given elsewhere. There's a tax that is imposed on people when they buy a TV set, like in England. Others, you have a household fee, a tax that depends on your environment, where you live. There's all kinds of funding levels, and we'll try to have a conversation on how to fund it.
Multi-year way, the public broadcaster. This is the conversation for Canadians.
Our second question, also for Hubert, Louis, or Heather. It's from Brian Hill online. How will CBC remain an impartial public broadcaster as advertising revenues increase in importance?
Heather, I saw you jump on that question.
Yeah, you know, we're not influenced by advertisers in terms of our editorial decisions or our content. There are opportunities for advertisers who want to participate in creation and dispersion of great content. We see it with lots of amateur athletes who need support. I know that for our Parapan athletes as well, there's lots of corporations and sponsors who genuinely want to support those athletes, and they want to participate in some of the content creation that goes on. But it's not, you know, we're very, very clear on where the line is between the editorial content and the entertainment value of a show, and where the intersection is between the advertiser's interests. It's an issue that a lot of entertainment companies are grappling with, you know, and sometimes, you know, it's usually pretty obvious. If you have too much advertiser, it's bad television. If you have, you know, a great TV show that doesn't get any advertising, that's also usually bad television if no one's attracted to it. So it's a...
I also think that we have a very clear distinction between the mandate that we have as a public broadcaster and the importance of keeping that distance with respect to any kind of commercial interest or corporate interest that we would have. So, and we have a board and we have all sorts of methods by which we ensure that that independence is kept.
Heather, you can keep the microphone. This is also online. It's directed, the question for you. It says, how are you addressing your mandate as it relates to Aboriginal programming specifically?
Well, I mean, I think John Bertrand can also speak to this issue because in terms of our radio and digital operations, we have, they're headquartered here for our digital for the cbc.ca/Aboriginal website, which is, I'm delighted to say, one of the most active and popular websites for First Nations that we have in this country. We are also involved in all kinds of radio programming. I think those of you who enjoyed New Fire with Lisa Charlie Boy this summer on CBC Radio 1, and we have a new show called Unreserved, also not a summer show, but a permanent show now that was developed here in Winnipeg. In terms of television, I've met with Jean LaRose a couple of times at APTN, and we are going to be co-producing a documentary series with APTN about the missing and murdered, and that's going to start production this fall. And I'll pass it to John for...
We are very much engaged. Part of our mandate here is to connect and reflect Indigenous people right across the country. The diversity of Indigenous people, the dynamic nature and change that is going on all across the country. And we are, I think, beginning to tell more stories, better stories, deeper stories, and stories that really resonate from the community and don't come from an agenda or a press conference or just from conflict. Stories that I think really challenge some of the stereotypes that are still inherent in this country. So we've got a ways to go. It's not all there yet, but I like some of the things that we're doing.
I'd just add two things. One, you know, we aired Blackstone, which was a great series produced by APTN. And our feeling was not enough people saw that series. You know, APTN does not have the leverage and marketing budgets that the CBC does. And so we felt by putting it on the CBC, it would expose it to a whole bunch of people who would otherwise never see it. And so we did that. And the other thing that we're doing is our news departments are all looking for and identifying Aboriginal spokespeople and experts on non-Aboriginal issues. There are Aboriginal economists, there are Aboriginal doctors, there are Aboriginal, and often what you see in the media is people turn to an Aboriginal spokesperson only on an Aboriginal issue. And that, again, sort of keeps that community in a place that isn't appropriate and isn't, you know, fully showcasing all the skills and expertise.
Thank you. So, je vous ai parlé beaucoup de mots.
I told you a lot about email and hashtags and stuff, but there are people in the room that have questions.
For Mr. Hubert Lacroix, because when there is a question that's really important, or a request that's really important, take it right to the top. cross-country checkup has been a very, very important thing in my life, but it's also been important to us as Canadians. It's really pulled us together from across the country, and I'm glad to see that it's continuing despite the departure of our host of the last 21 years. Because what it does is it makes sure that important issues are not silenced. Here in this country, many women and men who want to see an egalitarian and a just and a healthy society were very disappointed that the women's debate got shut down. But we have another opportunity. We have a cross-country forum, an ability to bring in voices from coast to coast to coast, to make sure that these issues that women recognize are important, but are important to all of us in society, get properly addressed in a way that they have done. So my request is that we have that we have a cross-country checkup show that focuses in on women's issues before we have to go to the polls, please.
I heard, thank you, and you have the people in front of the room who are listening.
Thank you, thank you. A request, nonetheless, not a question. So just remind you to try to pose in terms of a question. We will take a question from the floor. If you wanted to walk up to the mic, let us know who you are and what your question is. Yeah, we're just making our way to the microphone here in the hall at University of Winnipeg. Hello there.
Alors, bonjour tout le monde. Je me présente.
Hi everyone, I'm Mona Odette. I'm a grandma of 2 little grandchildren. I'm a mom of 3 daughters, and I'm a treasurer of CFA of Canada, so I'm an implicated francophone. So you know that the law on broadcasting tells to CBC to reflect the diversity of Canada at the provincial and national level. So I'm okay with changes. I know that we have to revise some things, but as a grandma, as a mom, as a francophone, I would like to know. And the 1 out of 2 that you said of CBC, I watch TV, I listen to the radio, I used to listen to Vincent Duro with his interviews. I love CBC, Radio-Canada, and my friends here know it. But reinventing CBC, wouldn't it be talking about the 2.6 million? We had the proof during the Chiefs debate. There was no question about the francophones in Quebec. So does that mean that as the management of Pluriel, the CBC will help me to promote my organization and to reach my community? And for example, in social work, maybe make some social changes in our francophone communities. So what does that mean? So I'm asking CBC to really revisit their things. I am a francophone, I pay taxes, and I ask that CBC Radio-Canada represents me and helps me to do my work as a promoter and as a community service provider. I heard your comments, ma'am. Can I address? Because there wasn't really a question in your intervention. The question is, how are you going to keep helping me and change your things to keep representing me? So I'm going to talk, and Louis will talk about the importance to our presence in the region, because we always said it. We cannot be a public broadcaster without being completely rooted in the public. So since 2008, there was a thesis to our plan towards 2011 and towards 2015 and now 2020. I talk about it because it was discussed for a long time. The debate was under 5 big themes. These 5 big themes had as a goal in a French debate of 2 hours to be as inclusive as possible, to talk about subjects that interested everyone, every Canadian from coast to coast to coast, and that did not represent the interests of one group in particular. So we made these questions in that aim, an inclusive aim. But we have to remind that our objective of covering the campaign, and I think we did it well, is that to make sure that everywhere in Canada, everywhere we share, that the issues that are local, municipal, provincial, and national be dealt with by the quality and the interventions of all our journalists. So during these 2 hours, yes, we did talk to the whole Francophone Canada and to the people that wanted to be interested in us. But Louis, could you talk about the importance that we give and the changes we made to reflect the regions and the feedback we got? Well, first of all, I would say that through everything you heard that was negative about Radio-Canada, the regional Francophone presence is more important. The interpreter could not hear the intervention. No, but what I said, bad things were like cuts and ill effects. I was just trying to say that through these challenges, which are constant and that we had to face, the Francophone presence in Radio Canada is more important than it was 5 years ago. Physical presence, presence on different platforms, presence on the radio, on TV, but also on social media. And I know that you use social media very well. But I'd like to remind you that 5 years ago, I had conversations here in Winnipeg when I was meeting people from the community. And we were asking at that time, when will CBC take care of having an offer in French on social media and on digital media? And it was a whole challenge at the time. And today, since 1 week, we really have, as you can see, an active cover of digital platforms 18 hours a day, and we're present on TV and on the radio with news 7 days a week, and that wasn't the case before. So with that, with all our efforts, our presence was improved. And maybe you want to add something specifically on your challenges? No, I don't think so. Unless there was something more precise on what's happening here. Let's talk about the Vincent Duro's show. People that were coming into radio to CBC in the afternoon. I liked it because it allowed me to understand the success stories in our communities. Maybe Mona, I will explain for people on the web because we're in Manitoba. The interpreter cannot hear anything. So maybe for you outside of Manitoba, here in Manitoba, there's 1 hour radio that we used to have last season. The grid was transformed, and this place is not here anymore. So I didn't mean that it vanished, but it was transformed. It was put somewhere else. It was transformed to be to fit with what is going on in the country. And the show we like with Vincent, and I was talking during the meeting of the board this morning, we're going to see those changes on those websites instead of the radio. But we can see that it's the engagement of the communities, and I think that everyone heard it. We're going to go on with another French question that comes through email. It's a question for Hubert Lacroix. What is the place of young people in CBC, Radio Canada? Well, you saw it today. You heard it. You heard Raphael. You heard the number of talents. We try to help to support our plan for 2020. You see all the efforts that we make to try to understand this new generation, because they consume products on a totally different way. We just need time to support the public broadcaster who is more and more interested in being relevant in the digital environment, that it's completely different from the one we know.
Hi, I'm Tracy and I'm an Indigenous student, and my question is directed to basically everybody. So from what our panelists are doing, what they have shared, they're doing an amazing job at helping our youth in the city, especially considering Winnipeg is the most racist city in the country. But my question is, what is CBC going to come together to do, not only now, but in a long-term plan to get the youth more involved in CBC radio, broadcasting, media, all of it together, not just Indigenous youth, but all youth together to make sure that they have a better tomorrow.
So direct efforts to get youth more involved to improve their futures. Not sure who wants to start.
One of the things, and Marcy was involved in it, and she may be able to just comment on it, we brought together, we had a project called Future 40, which identified these fantastic people who were change makers under 40 in this city, and we invited all of them, 30 came out with some additional people for a forum on racism. And they closed the door. It was not about making a whole bunch of programming. It was about leading a conversation. And it was very impactful. I had so much feedback, but more than that, and it was great that these people were involved, I think the people for CBC learned a lot. Because for us to make great programming, we have to understand the community. We have to know what people are saying and what they care about and what their passions are and all of those sorts of things. And we need to reach out in more and more ways like that. I would say the Indigenous site, it has one of the most active social media presences in CBC, and it is all about Indigenous youth all across the country. It is incredible conversations, and we know that so much is happening in that space that, again, is not about a press conference or about something that's going to be on the immediate agenda, but it's about being a part of a conversation that we're not currently part of right now, and we need to continue to do that.
I think Louis wants to add something.
Oui, je vais répondre en français.
I'm going to reply in French. Of course, I think the first thing we have to do is to make sure that young people have a spot in everything CBC does. So it's giving the opportunity to young people, like young authors, young movie makers, young people that have ideas, that have passion, to make sure that these people can realize what they're trying to do. And CBC must be a reception hub of ideas to make sure we can help them realize and broadcast these ideas. And this already exists, it's going to keep on existing, and we're going to do everything we can to keep on doing it, and we have examples in all areas.
Touch a lot more young people than people think. We have an incredible reach with millennials in this country, especially through CBC News. We also announced last week a partnership with Fullscreen, which is a multi-channel network that manages 2,000 Canadian internet YouTube stars. And we are helping to develop talent there, and they're helping us to learn about how young people are creating their own shows through that.
I just wanted to add, because John invited me to add with that event, it was very interesting. You mentioned millennials. I'm a Gen Xer. Millennials didn't want me to be there to be covering their story. They didn't want me to be there that day to be telling their story in some ways, even though it may have led to that. Millennials want to tell their own stories and be heard. They are a force to be reckoned with, this generation, and they, that day, at least I felt like at least CBC Manitoba, the best thing we did was probably turn the cameras off. And it's just a new time. The whole industry is changing, and the whole move to digital reflects that. And so the more I think we can do those types of events, while it's a different place for us to live, especially as journalists, it's a very different place for us to sort of come to understand stories. It's still a place of learning. So yeah, it was an interesting event here.
Millenniums born before me, after me, right? Yeah.
I think I have 10 years.
On va rester dans la salle.
Keep it in the room. I have a question. Hi, my name is Laurence Lemaire. I work here in Winnipeg with Janelle and Jeremy in documentaries. And my question is for Mr. Lacroix. Considering the current state of CBC and knowing that there were job cuts east to west in several stations in the country, and knowing that we are in election time, is CBC's future supposed to be an electoral challenge? The conversations we hear about CBC at the moment come from some parties that seem to have taken some positions. In such an environment, our role, our part is to listen, but especially at the level of the public broadcaster, is to make sure that our reporters keep covering the most important electoral issues, and not to give opinions on those, but to give you a variety of opinions so you too can make your own opinion and to come to a conclusion, to be better informed when you go to vote on the 19th of October. In this context, it's our pleasure to take act on the conversation that regard the public broadcaster. But there's no questions or revendications, special revendications or demands from the public broadcaster. No, it's a crown society that should not have in an electoral period to advocate. We cannot do that kind of things. We have to make sure, however, that our reporters do their jobs to cover throughout Canada, in all environments, in all provinces, in all stations, the electoral issues, so as to meet our journalistic procedures and standards.
For Hubert as well, are you planning on selling all of your buildings as reported by the media in these last few weeks? And if so, why?
I really had to smile on this one, sorry.
Sure.
I don't want to belabor this point, this is an important one. But since 2011, in the context of the strategic direction we took, and again in 2015, this is all about taking being more efficient, looking at our square footage, making sure that we take the resources that we have in walls and unused space and reinvesting it in content. We've reinventing ourselves, for example, in Halifax. In Halifax, we were in two buildings, two separate buildings, about 700 or 800 meters from each other, on 7 different floors. Really complicated to try to work together in this kind of environment, right? So we actually moved all of these people into a 43,000 square foot new space. Everybody applauded. There were 3,000 people lined up at the door that visited our new spaces last week, or actually a month ago. We did the same thing in Moncton. We reinvented ourselves in Matane, in Rimouski, in Saskatoon. When we do this, it has a plan, it is thought out, and there's a purpose to it. We're just not, there's no fire sale going on, and there's no news around our strategy on real estate. It's been open and very transparent since 2011.
Merci Hubert. Alors,
Thanks, Hubert. So we're going to continue in the room.
President of one of the CBC's unions. Mr. Lacroix, thank you for having a meeting today and talking about the CBC and its future. Under your leadership, you have implemented unprecedented and damaging cuts on the CBC, massive numbers, 2,000 staff, some 25%, crippling the CBC's ability to produce award-winning documentaries, to do quality Canadian programming, and to cover the news effectively across the country in French, English, and 8 Aboriginal languages. We heard you in Germany for the first time admit that you had been wrong in not raising the alarm earlier. We welcome that. And today, again, for the first time...
Do you have a clear question?
Yes, I'm getting to my question. For the first time, we hear you being very clear that the CBC is in a crisis. Thank you for that. I have 2 questions. What brought about your change of heart? And what are your plans to address it? How are you going to secure better funding for the CBC? And just one last thing. Given in this recent election campaign, we have seen increasing support for the CBC, including 3 of the 4 political parties pledging more money, better funding, and reversing the $115 million cut. Will you also be clear in that the way Canadians vote will affect the future of the CBC and Radio-Canada?
All right, Carmel, as you know, we've had this conversation many times before. Carmel is the head of the CMG. That's about half of our staff, so it's not the first time that we've interacted on this subject matter. And she will get the same answer she has unfortunately received all these times. So there's no surprise here either. To say that this is the first time that we've been clear about the model in which we are fighting for public broadcasting is not quite accurate. If you go back to the speeches that are public on our website, to the first speech I made in 2008 en face de la Chambre de commerce de Montréal.
Right across the Chamber of Commerce in Montreal.
The comments in Munich were about the whole of the public broadcasters in the world, because we all share the same issues. We all have the same issues. I can actually, and I did this, I can actually start reading you Mark Scott, who's got my job in Australia, his last speech. And you're going to find that the words are exactly the same ones that apply to us in Canada. You can listen to Tony Hall at the BBC, the Director General there. His last speech on the regions. They're actually inspiring their speeches with our experiences. We talk all the time. My point in Munich, the point I repeated last week in front of deputy ministers in Ottawa, the point I'm trying to make again today, is that we've been very busy in trying to manage a really difficult environment filled with challenges of change, with the audiences changing the way they change, the way that you guys change the way you consume our products, our services, at the same time where we've had shrinking resources. In that environment, CBC Radio-Canada has done a really smart turn. I see it taking form. I see what we're doing more and more in this relationship one-on-one happening, and it's going to accelerate, because if ever dollars came to us, we're not going back to the CBC of the years behind. We would accelerate the changes we're doing. We would accelerate the virage, the technological and the move towards digital. We would actually accelerate trying to give Louis and Heather more dollars for their content, whether it's radio, television, or online. We would accelerate this and not go back to what we were before. We can't go back, and we won't.
We're taking our next question from the floor. Thank you.
Merci, Walter Kleinschmidt.
Thank you. Walter Kleinschmidt from St. Boniface. I'd like to go back on the question regarding the rationalization of the assets of CBC, and to ask Mr. Lacroix, who will be in the board, that he brings to the board next week a motion that would promise that the public assets, the archives, the interviews, the microscience, everything that was collected and that's part of the heritage and culture of Canada, not be spread out and not be gotten rid of, as other libraries have done, and as CKSB did several months ago when they took all their stuff and they put it in a back room in a store to be sold at 25 cents. We lost all the heritage of the evolution of Francophone music in Manitoba, all the discs that were bought, there were comments. It was an incredible story that vanished without anyone knowing. Mr. Kleinschmidt, do you have a question? Yeah, I would like a promise from the board that when they move or sell buildings, we do not throw in the trash all the archives of the history of Canada that we had the chance, for which we paid, that we developed, and that CBC put together. So it's a demand, it's a request. Yes, I can give you a little context. CBC does not throw away the heritage, it keeps it. No, all of CKSB's discs were sold. No, I have to correct you. All the important discs in the history of Francophone music were kept. What was sold or left to the community were doubles and triples. They were not items that were a part of the history of music. It's the same process that we use everywhere. And I would like to tell you that we're about to announce the creation of a heritage committee to reassure the Canadian people, to tell them that every time something that shines out in such a context, make sure that the best specialists of conservation are going to consult with Radio-Canada and CBC to make sure there is no abuse. I can reassure you, and Pierre might be able to confirm, that the Manitoba musical heritage was not thrown out. I can see that I've seen the discs myself with notes from Couture and others that were saying, listen to this, do not listen to this. It's history, it's the evolution of what we are hearing. And it would have been incredible archives. If you can keep talking with Patrick. He's going to take note of all of this. We have to understand that it might be something particular in Manitoba, that's specific to Manitoba. Maybe it happened somewhere else. But we're talking about several types of archives. We're talking about interviews, written documents. We have agreements with the Center for Heritage. There are things that are for successions. There is an unprecedented effort for the preservation of audio and video archive and this heritage. We know that it is our responsibility to protect it. And as Louis said, the discs that we let go, for the most part, and I remember I was there, for the most part, there were doubles, triples, and there were things that were preserved somewhere else, or that were preserved in another format, maybe in a digital format. Thank you.
Back to the room. I just want to go online. Remember, we're taking questions from across the country this afternoon. This question is directed online. It was emailed. This is for Heather. It says, will CBC be investing in online platforms similar to Netflix?
Like an over-the-top player? There is a CBC player. You can go on and you can find CBC programs on the CBC player. I know we are looking at updating our player. It's had some creaky issues in the last 6 months or so, and we have picked a vendor, and we'll be implementing that shortly. So we do have an over-the-top ability for Canadians to look at our shows, and it's all free. And of course, our shows are available as well in the on-demand services of most of the distributors in the country.
I have a question. Is it like Tout.tv, kind of, like in French?
It's a different model. The player is just CBC content. Tout.tv has alternate content as well and has different levels.
Thank you very much. So we went to the web. We're going back to the floor.
Good afternoon. My name is Khalid Mahmood, and I am a member of the local Ahmadiyya Muslim Association. A recent debate, we heard, unfortunately, the real issue of the women's are not being addressed at the time, like missing indigenous women, women trafficking, and poverty and violence against women. But one issue came, and it was about the niqab, which I think is non-issue, but I think that's what in the forefront. And I'd like to thank you and appreciate that CBC is giving the balanced coverage on this issue. To me, it's a non-issue. There's a very 0.01%, I think there's only one women that came in the front and now is the headline.
And while we appreciate your comments on that topic, do you have a direct question?
Yeah, but that question is that I hope that CBC should give him more a balanced coverage on this issue to educate it more to the Canadian people so they can understand this issue. And I think that because the CBC has only one avenue of the air in the habit, so you have that responsibility to give a balanced and unbiased coverage, and I thank you what you're actually doing it. I appreciate what I'm hearing on the news, and I hope that you will continue to do that. So, have any comment in that? I will appreciate.
Thank you for that. We heard your comment.
Okay, we have. Thank you for your comment, sir. We have a last question from the floor now.
Exactly.
I'll ask my question in French and in English. Ça sera plus rapide.
It'll be faster. My name is Gabriel Gosselin. I'm in charge of communications and information of the Division Scolaire Franco-Manitobaine.
Former Radio-Canadien, a former CBC journalist with Radio-Canada. I think we can all agree that it's very important that the CBC be available on all platforms. Je pense qu'on est tous d'accord pour dire que
I think we all agree to say that the offer of radio of CBC should be better served on all platforms. What's more nebulous, however,
how both corporations are going to interact in the future. Ce qui est plus nébuleux, c'est comment les
what's more nebulous is how both corporations are going to interact in the future. Are they the same? Are we going to see more symbiosis or more synergy in the offer in English and in French?
Symbiosis in the offer that is made both in French and in English in the future. And if I can, one comment, un commentaire.
One comment, if I can. Oui, très
comme personne qui consomme et CBC et Radio-Canada, as a person CBC and Radio-Canada, I would really...
As a person that consumes both, j'aimerais voir...
de Radio-Canada être plus rapide. Surtout dans mon métier, on attend très longtemps.
J'aimerais que les sites soient plus rapides. Alors...
Are we going to see with the new transformation more symbiosis in offer?
Okay, thank you.
On est très conscient. I know we're running out of time. On est très conscient.
We're really conscious of both publics, and we know what we can do together. When I see John and Pierre working together in Manitoba on the news delivery and on how they're going to be welcomed, on the infrastructures that are combining, it's really important to be as efficient as possible, all at the same time respecting the local, regional, and provincial publics. So yes, we really know this. We always talk about it at the board. The goal is to respect the audiences in the mandate that we have to declare, inform, and entertain. Thank you very much, Hubert. Unfortunately, our time is limited today, so this is what puts an end to the third and last part of our annual public meeting. I was about to say a general meeting, but that's not this at all. A little tip before we leave you, even for people online, the questions that will be asked the most will be, the most frequently asked question will be displayed on our website within 1 week. So keep asking them today. So I remind you the addresses in French. APA@radio-canada.ca.
cbc.ca et merci beaucoup de votre participation à cette assemblée publique.
Ask your questions at 8 p.m. at cbc.ca. Thank you for being at our assembly today in Winnipeg.
To all of our speakers and our presenters for the questions, the answers, and a good discussion here in Winnipeg. Whether you participated here in Convocation Hall at the University of Winnipeg or online, please take Carla's advice. Continue the conversation online. Send your questions in to your public broadcaster, and the most frequently asked questions will be answered. There's a Jets game tonight, if you care to go. We have a long way to make playoffs. Thank you across the country for participating in CBC Radio-Canada's annual public meeting. Thank you.
Bonne fin de journée.
Bonne fin.